And we're live!
Yeah.
Hey, everyone! This is SPSM, #SPSM. If you don't know, I'm at Doc Foreman, and you're different now. That happened. I'm so glad that you are here. We have had a lot of folks joining us last few weeks who have been new to the suicide prevention social media chat. It's been a hell of a week. And we're going to sort of touch on that.
What do you mean? What are you talking about?
What happened? Yeah. We're going to talk about that, but we're going to talk about how we're going to talk about that in a minute. Licensed psychologist. I work with veterans at high risk for suicide, and we do this cool thing. I have with me Dr. Bart Andrews. Dr. Bart Andrews, introduce yourself.
What's going on? It's at Bart Andrews. Also, a lot of the folks have been calling me B-Man. So that's good. That's trending.
Who calls you
B-Man.
B-Man?
No, nobody. But you got to start somewhere. So if I want to be B-Man, this is my new cognomen. B-Man. I'm usually in St. Louis at a groovy crisis agency called Behavioral Health Response, which is truly one of the most amazing crisis agencies among many wonderful crisis agencies across the country, but we're really good at what we do. I'm currently in lovely Sacramento, and for those of you folks who live in Sacramento, this city rocks. I love it. California is awesome. We love you, California.
Yeah, California's been kind of a fun place these days. And I know that he's on mute and the camera's off, but for just a brief second, I want to introduce you to our IT producer, Mr. Tony Wood. Tony, come say hi to the people. We're just getting the little George Washington picture. There you are, Tony, say hi.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tony Wood. I'm the chair of the board of the American Association of Suicidology, and I'm a lot of other stuff. Tweet me at @ADWWW if you have any questions for our guests. Otherwise, I'm going to go.
And if you're interested in joining the American Association of Suicidology, what do you do?
Say what? What?
If you're interested in joining, what?
Well, visit suicidology.org.
Absolutely.
Whoa, that was cool. It's like a game show.
Oh, you have no idea. Please do tweet at Tony Wood, or otherwise message him if you have any difficulty with the show.
I don't know who that is. At AD.
Questions.
We covered this in the pre-show. We did.
This
was in the pre-show. We went through it in the pre-show.
Yeah. That's the number 200. I think we may have done a pre-show number 2.
Oh, very briefly, before we sort of really switch gears to our guest, who I'm really excited about tonight, it would be a real disservice not to comment on the events of this week. The facts are that Donald Trump was elected president, and following his election, there was a very newsworthy spike in calls to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, text to crisis text line, in the neighborhoods of 2 to 3 and 4 times the normal volume. You should know that despite the increase in volume, in fact, the service fidelity really remained high as far as the reports that I read, which was really impressive. And people are in the process of trying to understand this, because my understanding is this was an unprecedented amount of crisis context following a presidential election. This is something that we're working hard to understand. We also know that a lot of folks who work in the crisis industry, and I'm going to let Bart comment on this briefly too, are probably understandably tired and worn out. It's been quite a week. We also just saw amazing acts of compassion, one human being to another, people responding to those calls. And we will be trying to understand that. If you want to talk more about the events of this week and how it impacted our world, we're going to be talking about that on the 4th of December. We will have folks from the National Suicide Prevention Line and Crisis Text Line talking about their data and talking about how they responded. And we look forward to you tuning in for that and to discuss that. Bart, you want to talk a little bit about what this was like from the Crisis Center point of view?
I think one of the, it was, so just so that, it's just amazing how much emotion I have about this. So you have to bear with me. This is the 5th election I've been through as working in a crisis agency, and I can tell you that We've never even thought about, in terms of staffing or impact, we've never even thought about presidential election and trauma and people being really stressed out and call volume going up. In fact, the last presidential election, I was traveling and doing a training like I'm doing this week, and it wasn't, nobody even talked about it. It didn't even come up. It was like a non-event, right? It's just something, we've all been through elections through our lives. Elections just happen. But I think that this was a very different election, and I don't know that certainly I've never been through a process like this. I found myself preoccupied with the election, and I found the emotional experience of election day extremely stressful, and then watching the election results unfold to be at times a surreal experience, and then all of the processing that went along with that. And I think one of the things that I should have anticipated but I didn't is that we had not only were our callers calling in distraught, but it impacted our staff. It should have occurred to me that we had staff that were directly impacted by this election. They felt it strongly, and so as staff were coming in, we had to do. The staff at BHR, Angela Tate, Laura Coleman, the folks that are in the operations end of things, just phenomenal. All the managers were really attending to people because folks were coming in and having to talk to folks that were distraught, and staff are human beings, and this election was something that hit people in many different ways. And it's really interesting, and one of the things that's really interesting is not only were people distraught who were rooting for Hillary and Hillary lost, and that was painful, but there was a flip side that was really interesting that I only have been exposed to recently, that there were people that supported Donald Trump and voted for Donald Trump, and they didn't feel like they had to, like, they couldn't even express that they were excited or happy about this person winning because they could see how upset other people were. So they're dampening down their reaction. And so we've had this incredible experience where people on both sides were in a lot of discomfort and awkwardness around this thing that was going on in our lives. And so I think that this hit so many things, and it impacted call volume, and so we saw our volume go up, and I think that's something that will continue to unfold over the next few weeks. We're not done with this. It's going to continue to evolve.
And you know, it's the supermoon. Thank you, Shane Owens, for tweeting us and pointing that out. Just saying, go outside if you have a minute on Twitter, take a look. But in competition with the supermoon, we have someone who shines, I think, just a little brighter. We have Dr. Ali Mattu here with us. You're gonna have to make sure that the name gets pronounced right.
That was good.
This is the hazing that every guest gets, because you're lucky if I call you even close to the right name. But I want to talk a little bit about why he's on the show today. You know, one of the things that I started being really interested in is that 2016, of course, is the year of live streaming. We were really interested in seeing mental health professionals who are really taking an interest in video. And so I was looking for folks who were doing, I think, what I thought was a really good job at that, and had put out some feelers to folks who would want to talk a little bit about doing video and who were young professionals doing excellent social media. Dr. Mattu's great. First of all, because the science fiction element of this, any chance that we are going to get to talk about Star Trek, Doctor Who, we've got so many fans, I know, in the SPSM community who talk about that sort of aside, and I thought you would find this particularly appealing. And why he does that, which he's totally like a legit, you know, faculty member at like a good school. Ha! And still does this, and I thought did a fabulous job and really sort of elevated the conversation in a really approachable way. So I'm going to give you a chance to go ahead, Ali, and introduce yourself.
That is a pretty darn good introduction. I should do this more often. This feels pretty good. So thank you for that. My name is Ali Mattu. I'm a clinical psychologist. My day job, I work mostly with kids, adolescents, young adults, and adults, primarily on anxiety and anxiety-related disorders. I do things like OCD treatment, social anxiety, tics, Tourette's, hair pulling, skin picking, but then also what comes along with that is depression, sometimes substance use, things like that. But I also do other stuff on my off hours. I run a website called brainknowsbetter.com, where I talk about the psychology of science fiction and sort of celebrating both of those things, psychology and what the great science fiction, film, TV, and books can teach us about psychology. And then also, I have a YouTube channel which I started back in January 2015. It's called The Psych Show, which you can find just by looking up The Psych Show on YouTube, or it's also on Facebook. And that's all about making psychology fun and easy to understand. And you can tweet me at Ali Mattu, ALIMATTU. And I'm so excited for this. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you all. Really honored to be here. And you know, I don't know what we're going to talk about. I could expand to the infinite cosmos, but I'm so looking forward to it.
Let me pitch you something. So I am a reader of science fiction from early girlhood, especially really classic stuff. Mm-hmm. And so, like, one of the first really big series that I read as a kid was the Foundation and Empire series, right? By what's his face, super famous. So of course I can't remember.
Isaac, it was Asimov.
Isaac Asimov, right?
Yeah.
And one of the great characters that's sort of in the background of the history of all these books is there's a psychologist, and I find this really interesting that this is what I've grown up to do, named Harry Seldon, who understands math at some complicated level and using really amazing big data science predicts all of human behavior and all of human history into the future.
Yeah.
Which I think, interestingly enough, we're going to,
I think it's called like a psychohistorian or something.
I know, it's so cool. Sorry, I was really into this as a kid, I admit. And we're like, big data is actually doing that now. We're like figuring out how to use social media, big data to predict people's suicides. And I think that's really cool. I know it shaped me. Can you tell us what science fiction shaped you and how it shaped you to think about human beings?
Oh, it is the driving force that shaped me. So I was a pretty aimless kid growing up in Silicon Valley, California. There weren't really that many things I was excited or interested in. And I would ride my bike, I would climb trees, but that was about it. And my dad really worried that I wasn't going to graduate high school. So that's kind of like where I was. Until one day when my brother took me to go see Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. That changed everything. And I devoured sci-fi after that. And I did graduate high school, but barely. I just kind of barely passed. So I went to community college, and I waited till the last minute to enroll in classes, and one of the only classes that was left open was Intro Psych. So I took that class, sat in the back by the door, and as that first lecture unfolded, I remember his name, Wendell Gosling, Professor Gosling, at De Anza College in Northern California, in Cupertino, California. He was talking about all these myths that we have about human behavior and the brain and all of this. And as he was talking, I was like, oh my gosh, he has answers to all those great questions that psychology asks, or that science fiction asks. So here's a science with answers to science fiction questions. And I was hooked. Once that connection was made, I was hooked. So I think a very short answer to your question would be science fiction shaped the type of ways I ask questions about human beings and about nature and about how we interact. And psychology gave me a way of understanding it.
So let's talk about Data from Star Trek.
Oh, hell yeah.
Let's talk about it.
He's the best.
That's like one of the through storylines about Data is what does it mean to be human and what makes up human experience, human emotions, and human ways of behaving, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a story, because this is what you do. You use science fiction and storytelling to help people access information about psychology and help people understand the scientific study of human behavior using science fiction. Like, explain maybe a way that Data or another character might do that in Star Trek.
So Data's a great example. Sometimes I've used Data to demonstrate how what it's like to be on the autism spectrum, where Data's a character who at the beginning of Star Trek: The Next Generation is really struggling to understand other people, the emotions of other people, why people do things. Sarcasm's lost on him, and he's struggling to understand how to fit into a crew. But he learns over time. And also what we learn about Data over time is there are some major strengths to the way he sees other people and the unique contributions that he makes to the crew. So Data, for a lot of people I've worked with who are on the autism spectrum, is such a great source of strength that there's some things that I share in common with this person. And like him, I can improve not only how I interact with other people and how I understand other people, but I can make a unique contribution to the crew. So that's kind of one way. But another way, one of my favorite episodes from Star Trek: The Next Generation is called The Measure of a Man. I think it's from the second episode, and it's where there's this court case about whether or not Data's property of Starfleet. And it cuts through a lot of issues about slavery and about how we treat each other and about freedom, like basic human rights and freedoms. So there's so many ways we can take Data. He's one of my favorites. I could talk a long time about Data.
I thought he was pretty cute, but then again, I was, 12. Let's all just own that. Bart, really quickly, check in with the feed. The feed's going really fast, and we have a lot of people here tonight. What's the Twitter feed looking like?
Well, there's one interesting question I think that we really should address, because one of the questions from Amber Cannon, who's just been a regular recently and always has great questions, is where do people go for help? And so often when we're on suicide prevention and social media, we're talking emotional issues come up. You saw me just talking about the election got me emotional. So somebody mentioned crisischat.org, which is great. I'm a huge fan, and my staff love if you want to text crisis text line 741-741, and I was working on getting that link out. If you just need to talk and it's not an immediate crisis, 7 cups of tea is amazing, folks. So
yes.
if other folks have resources, please tweet those out. And so I think one of the things folks are kind of catching up and getting up to speed. And one of the things Shane Owen said, Asimov predicted this all. And I'm telling you what, Dr. Owens is fantastic. And Isaac Asimov did have an amazing ability to see into what our future was going to look like. And he did kind of call some of this stuff. So, and I think that's another example of how we find truth through science fiction. And I think that's why having Ali on the show is amazing. So I'll keep checking.
You should also know, before we move on to some more conversation, that we have actually a lot of people who are totally geeking out and completely and immediately connect with these stories that you're talking about, these characters and these different worlds and different franchises. Why do you think people connect so quickly and identify so strongly when you teach from these kinds of analogies?
Stories are incredibly powerful, and stories are, there's some of you might have heard of The Moth, which is this great storytelling community. And there's a moth show in probably every city and in the country. And the moth is named after moths. And the idea is humans are attracted to stories the same way moths are attracted to light. Mm-hmm. And so when we can take really complex or tough ideas or messy ideas from psychology, from mental health, and we can use the stories that we love, the stories that we imagine, the stories that we live in as a bridge to understand those concepts, we make those concepts so much easier to understand and so much more relatable and so much more personal and more powerful. So I think one of the, if I have a big criticism of the field of mental health, is that we oftentimes struggle to make what we're discussing easy to understand and relatable, and that's where stories can just fill in that gap and make things that much more more digestible and palatable.
I'm kind of thinking about I read a couple of different kinds of blogs. They're trying to cover difficult topics, and I am all week, right? Consume a lot of social media all week. And there are people who are trying to spell out the nuances of a complicated idea that has, you know, a lot of academe behind it, a lot of emotion behind it. It requires a lot of reading. I mean, I have a PhD, I do read, but I mean, come on. and in fact, you know, when I remember watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, having watched the original Star Trek, you know, reruns when I was a kid, and Buck Rogers and all that, you know, fun stuff. And the fact is that you could communicate an idea in a much shorter period of time in a really engaging way where it sort of hits you in a really, like, you know, in social psych, they talk about persuasive channels are those that are sort of indirect, that you're explaining a truth that people are going to get like that. Right?
Absolutely.
And I'm trying to think, what are some of those science fiction moments that sort of about humanity that helped you get something like that? And I'm wondering if different people from the show want to comment. We'll start with you, Ali.
Wow. That's a really great question. I think where it's happening most recently for me is with the show Black Mirror. Which is, right. No, I don't. That's the feeling I have after every Black Mirror episode I watch.
Oh my God. You just saying it stressed me out.
Yeah, because they've just released their next their next thing, and I know I'm gonna watch, and I'm just gotta wait until I can handle it.
So I won't tell you which one, but one of the new episodes of the new season of Black Mirror surprisingly has a happy ending. I'm not going to reveal which one. But I was so shocked that the ending didn't leave me with a deep state of depression.
Yes.
But the reason I mentioned Black Mirror is and for those of you who aren't familiar with the show, it's an anthology series, kind of like The Twilight Zone, where every episode has a different cast, different story. You don't have to watch it in order, but it's all about the black mirror of technology, the reflection that our modern technology has on us. And what Black Mirror is able to do is it's able to pinpoint new issues that are coming up from the technology that we use every day. And there's an episode on the second season. There's so many episodes I like, but there's an episode on the second season about someone who has lost their husband, and they sort of recreate, or lost their partner, and recreates their identity using social media. And just around that same time, I read some research about personalities and how they're expressed on social media. And overall, if you look at the big personality characteristics, they tend to hold pretty true on how we express ourselves online and how we express ourselves offline. And so that episode of Black Mirror just so well brought that together. And there's also another episode of Black Mirror, which, again, I can't say which one because that would kind of be a spoiler, but there's an episode of Black Mirror that deals with artificial intelligence and how we interact with artificial intelligence. And we're not quite there yet in reality, but it brings up issues that are really important to psychology, like this whole idea of objective self-awareness, that to be a real sentient life form, you sort of need to be aware of your consciousness and aware of yourself as a social being. And that episode deals all with that. And so it got me thinking, wow, when we get to the point of having AI, there are going to be mental health experts whose job it is probably going to be to determine, does this thing have objective self-awareness? Is it aware of itself, or is it faking it?
iRobot!
Right? Right?
Say that.
Yeah, no, I mean.
Oh my God.
So
I don't know how many times I've read that.
Yeah, it's so good. One actually, so there's like two really geek out. There's two iRobots. There's a story and a short story, and then there's the Outer Limits iRobot episode, which is my favorite. It starred Leonard Nimoy, and then they remade Outer Limits in the 90s, and they also had him there, I think. Okay, that was a tangent, but I would say Black Mirror.
That was inside baseball right there.
Yeah. Yeah, but I actually want to hear your examples too. If there's if any of you are sci-fi fans and you've also made the connection where, oh, that's that thing, or like, oh, now I better understand that.
You know, I have to tell you, it's funny that you mentioned Black Mirror, because there is a Black Mirror episode that I saw last year that I cannot shake. And it was that first season, I think, where they're all riding the bicycles, right? To like, I think produce power, but they never really tell you. And your only way out is to consume media constantly and sort of ride this bicycle, the stationary bike to nowhere, right? To earn points, to possibly be on a show to get your way out. And of course, things go wrong because it's Black Mirror, and I won't ruin it for you because I can't stop thinking about it. But one of the things that, you know, it talks about is a life worth living, and what is a meaningful life worth living, and can you get it? Something that I'm always talking to my patients about, like, what is a life worth living to you? What do you need to do to get it? And these folks are trying to figure that out. You know, I don't know that the ending's a great ending for that, but definitely the idea that being in some sort of endless, meaningless, like riding a stationary bike to nowhere in hopes for points to be like a reality show celebrity, like that's definitely, by the way, that's not the way. Don't do it. Alarming. Go ahead.
Who's going? You pointing to me? You pointing to me? Okay, so first of all, having read some of Ali's blogs, one of the things he mentioned is how sci-fi, and he used Star Trek as an example, made it safe to talk about intense subjects that are kind of taboo in the moment, right? And so one of the books that blew my mind as a young man is Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness, which in terms of exploring gender identity and gender roles and about what it means to be a man or woman, and that we have these things inside of us, and that it's really interesting to me. It was that I read that book, and that book it fundamentally changed my view of the world and the people in the world, right? And it's amazing that somebody was able to do that, but they were only able to do it in talking about the future. It creates distance. And think about, we do that in therapy sometimes to talk about difficult things. We create distance. It's one of the reasons we use metaphors, right? So science fiction is like this beautiful way to create these metaphors that provide enough emotional distance that we get perspective on the values that are connected in an issue. And I think this is really key. And I think that Ali really hits on this in his writing, that we feel values more than think them. And so we don't have really good, and there's good research on this. We feel values more than we think them, right? They're more emotional than cognitive. And so we don't have good perspective on them in the moment. And then thoughts follow them, and we think we're reasoning and we're not. And science fiction really does this, allows us to give a space to get at the actual values that are connected with the feelings that we're having. I'll never forget, there's an Isaac Asimov, and I think it's an Isaac Asimov short story, where this guy takes this really good job. He goes to this other planet to take a job, and it's this really high-paying job. He's really excited about it, and the people are thrilled to meet him, and he's the waste manager, right? He manages the waste. And there's and the story kind of ends when he's all excited and he tries to date somebody, and they're like, oh no, you handle the waste. We don't actually date you. You handle the waste, right? And so here's this thing, right? This guy's been brought on board. They bring in an outsider to handle the waste because they won't touch it, and by him being a part of it, they won't touch him. Right. And we do this sort of thing. We do this sort of thing all the time. Right. We do this sorts of things in all kinds of ways where we ostracize people. And Isaac Asimov had this beautiful way of using these metaphors in space in the future to hit home these things that we do to people all the time. Right. So.
Yeah. And through that, by creating these stories that are essentially about us, about who we are, the things we believe, the things that we value, how we treat each other, what's happening in society, but doing it through this other lens has the opportunity to cut through some of the barriers that we have to having these discussions. I think this is the great beauty of so much sci-fi, and in particular about Star Trek. The original series was really created as a way of talking about the major issues happening in the 60s, but doing it in a way that you couldn't really talk about back then. I mean, there was episodes about the Vietnam War, about civil rights, about
interracial romance.
Interracial
which
romance,
was like,
yeah.
Like the first kisses really got to happen in science fiction, because it certainly can't happen to real people here and now, right?
Exactly.
Like,
And through that, I think people were having important discussions, but not in the way that they would usually happen through, you don't get the usual partisan sort of guard up and all of that sort of stuff. No, Bart, I absolutely agree with everything you're saying there.
Thanks.
So let's talk about suicide in science fiction, because you actually wrote a really we might want to like give you a minute to tell your story as well, because we're all geeking out over some of our favorite moments. But in fact, when it comes to suicide prevention, you're in fact a person with lived experience, and you're also a loss survivor. And you talk about the connection of science fiction and suicide, and also science fiction and your loss to suicide. I'm wondering if you'd like to talk about that some.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to share the experience. So as I mentioned in the beginning over here, I got into science fiction because my brother took me to go see Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered, which actually I thought it was Star Trek VI when I went to go see it. And then we went home and my brother said, "Do you want to watch the other 5 Star Trek movies?" And I said, "There's 5 more." And he's like, "Yeah, that was Star Trek 6. And I goes, "Oh, I thought that was Star Trek VI." So that's how I learned about what Roman numerals are. So there's that. But my relationship with my brother, I was 8 and he was 17 when he took me to go see that movie. And our childhood, my childhood, was full of him introducing me to all of this sort of stuff and diving into it and helping me to understand what it means and what these questions are and all of that. And then I lost my brother to suicide in 2008. And the experience, I was in grad school at the time, and he lost a long struggle he had with bipolar depression. And the experience was incredibly difficult for me. It was a 5-year-long process where I describe it as me ridding the universe of reminders of him, because it was so painful to me to be reminded of him in photographs or in the video games we used to play, like Street Fighter 2 or Star Trek and all of this sort of stuff. So I stopped watching and I stopped engaging with all that stuff because the shadow of his suicide so it blocked out all the other past memories I had of his life. And every time I was reminded of it, I felt like I was having a panic attack, like going down the street, talking to someone, and they might say, "I'm so mad at my boss, I just want to kill myself." And that would trigger me. And I couldn't handle those feelings. So I would just try to rid my universe of them. And the only place where I would really see my brother or experience anything about him was in my dreams. And it was almost always the same dream. I would dream that he is walking through the doors and he never was gone. He was always there, and it was just this big misunderstanding. And I would wake up and it was like I lost him all over again. It was like realizing that he died all over again. I started calling that the parallel universe where my brother lived. And it was these 2 separate realities. What changed, and this is also consistent with a lot of the research on survivors. What changed was, 5 years went by, and it often takes a lot of time for people who have lost someone to suicide to be able to get to a place where they can talk about it. It's such a complicated grief. I dealt with a lot of guilt. I dealt with a lot of the grief that comes along with it, but I felt this responsibility. And it took me about 5 years, but I started talking about it to trusted people. All those things that I feared that I wouldn't be able to handle it or people would judge me. I had this big fear that people would think I'm like the worst therapist in the galaxy, that like I couldn't even help my own brother. None of those fears came to be. And actually, that's a very long way to answer your question too about why I started doing this. What I learned is by talking about psychology and science fiction, I could not only keep his memory alive for me, but try to do for other people what he did for me. So that's sort of been my story. I mean, that's why I'm wearing a Baymax t-shirt right now. And one of the reasons why I'm wearing this t-shirt is Baymax to me represents, like, in the movie, if you've seen Big Hero 6, he sort of helps the main character who's dealing with a loss. He helps him get support from his peers. He helps him. He lost his brother too, and he helps him with behavioral activation and being able to do the things that he loves again. And that's what I'm trying to do now with the blogging, with the vlogging, with all the logging, all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to pay forward what he did for me. So that's my story.
Being vulnerable that way and sharing that with us. People are really connecting with this. Bart, do you want to check in with us and let us know what's going on in the feed?
So many people are talking about their own experiences, either seeing science fiction movies or talking. Dr. Shane Owens is talking about Sam Delaney's Dahlgren, which I've never actually read or seen, and that sounds really good. And I think we've got Lisa Sullivan saying we tend to feel values more, and she's getting at the point that really, and Maxwell, sci-fi is a beautiful way to create metaphors, right? So this is all stuff that's just really cool. And I think that the thing that really hit me when you're talking about your brother, because my uncle died of suicide when I was 19 years old. And it's funny because I just wrote him out of my life. And when I started to be in a better place myself and in recovery, I started to include him back into my life. Yeah. Right. And actually I have a relationship with him now. And it's really interesting. People talk about, there's different ways that we manage grief. And one of the things that I've done is I've worked my uncle into my life. And often when I'm presenting about suicide, one of the things that I do before I present is I have a conversation with my uncle, right? Because he's definitely the reason I ended up in suicide prevention and in psychology. There is no doubt that his death shaped me in a way, and I was ashamed of that, and I'm no longer ashamed of it, and I'm proud of him. Right. I wish he didn't have to die that way, but I have this alternate world where he's still a part of me. Right. And I can honor him, and we talk sometimes, and it's really, it's not, sometimes it's sad, but mostly it's this thing in me that had to heal, and bringing him back into my life in this alternate world kind of way, has made me so much a better person and a happier person. Right. Well, and yeah, go ahead. Because you were talking about your brother that way. It just hit me like a ton of bricks, Ali.
Yeah, no, I completely relate to what you're saying here. And one of the things, well, first off, I have to give a shout out to Dr. Shane Owens. Dr. Owens, you are a very cool dude.
No, don't encourage Shane. No, we don't. No, April, can we edit that out? Don't encourage him, dear God.
Yeah. You give him a compliment when you never hear the other.
Oh God, no.
He's a big geek and a good friend of mine, and we have been known to be at many workshops and conferences together, and just end up talking about Star Trek. So there's that. But one of the things that I really want to emphasize here to our community is I heard a great analogy about it from when I was at a moth workshop. They said, you tell stories about your scars, not your wounds. So sometimes it takes a while to be at a place where you can share and talk about your story. And for 5 years, I could not. With my old friends, people who knew me before my brother died, they would walk around eggshells with me, and they didn't know if I was ready to talk about it or not. And I felt this fear that they wouldn't be able to handle it, or I wouldn't be able to handle it if I opened up. And with new people I met, I pretended to be an only child. I just didn't want to have that conversation. So it's okay if you're at a place where if you've lost someone, to suicide, or you've lost someone and you're grieving for another reason, it might take a while for that wound to heal, and that's okay. But we share stories with others about our scars, not our wounds, once we're ready for it.
So you did a wonderful blog, I know, and like you're gonna mean that shit about scars and wounds, right, Bart?
Oh,
Chris Maxwell, you're out
Chris
there.
Maxwell,
you got this. We've got people; they have skills.
We do have people.
So we do, and they're amazing. We have this amazing community. You did actually a really amazing blog talking about a particular character and the issue of suicide in science fiction, and you did an amazing blog, and it was not short, and I still read it.
Yeah, it's not short. Yeah.
But there were pictures. In my defense, there were pictures. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The pictures do help. That's one of my big gripes about grad school is most of my textbooks in grad school didn't have any pictures in them. It annoyed me so much. Like all my undergrad books would have little tiny cartoons in the side. Loved it. Makes it so much easier. Yeah, so
I know they talk about sex all the time, no pictures. Way to go, grad school. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, we need pictures and photos and diagrams and cartoons. So one of my favorite science fiction series, Battlestar Galactica, actually features a character who does take their own life. And I won't reveal the name in case anyone here is watching and doesn't want spoilers.
I wasn't sure I could pronounce it.
Yeah. It's okay. We don't have to pronounce it. It happens pretty late in the series, I think in the last season. So there's two layers to this. There's the one layer, which is the way that character, their suicide is actually presented, I think really honors a lot of the experience we have of how suicide can present itself, as well as some of the risk factors and all of that sort of stuff. For those of you who might not be aware, Battlestar Galactica, it's a series about how do I summarize this? Basically,
this is the second one, not the original one, because I watched that one with the cute little robot dog. But keep going.
Yeah, the original had Richard Hatch, and it was so cute. Yeah, well, everyone was pretty dreamy there. I think everyone in the new one is also a little dreamy.
But Starbuck is not it turns out doesn't work for me the same.
No, that
anyway,
Starbuck is playing for a different team. The premise of Battlestar Galactica, the new one, is that humanity's created artificial intelligence. The artificial intelligence has evolved. They come back and they commit genocide against humanity. There's only a few hundred, or there's like 50,000 survivors left or something, and they're refugees trying to find a new home, a place called Earth. Mm-hmm. And the show deals with questions of hope, of reasons for living, and this one character, their reasons for living are suddenly taken away, and in a period of agitation, they take their own life and they end up shooting themselves. And we know that access to a weapon, especially a firearm, is a major risk factor, and the risk factors we know come together for this character in a way that it very much reflects what we know from research. So I wrote an article about that for Suicide Prevention Month a little while back, with the hopes that people who are fans of the series might resonate with them. So there's actually two more layers to that. One is Battlestar Galactica was a show my brother and I watched together, and I never got to finish the show with him. We would watch it, and then he used to live in San Diego and I was in LA, and then sometimes I'd visit him or he'd visit me and we'd watch it. And then when I was in grad school on the East Coast, we'd watch it and then call each other the next day and talk about everything what it means. And then we never got to finish it. And then, shortly after my brother died, that character took their life. And it actually was one of the first times after I had lost my brother to suicide, where I saw suicide featured in a story that in a way that I thought was actually made sense in the context of the story and made sense in the context of mental health. And that got me thinking, like, if stories about suicide, about the struggle with suicide, as well as suicide prevention and mental health, if they were featured in stories more, maybe you could have more of a dialogue and a discussion about this stuff. Maybe people would realize that talking about suicide doesn't make people suicidal. It can actually help. It can actually break down some of the stigma here. So that got me thinking there. And then the third layer to mention to that is I actually got to meet the person who plays that character, and we actually got a chance to talk about the article. I tweeted them in the article, and they read it, and
Did you totally fanboy them?
A little bit. Fortunately, my wife was also there to keep me in check. But
we don't judge.
Yeah,
we're so excited.
We had a really great moment where the actress who plays this character said, it's for these moments that I do this. And I hope that, the story helps someone. And it was a really great moment. So if anyone is a fan of science fiction, if you haven't read haven't seen Battlestar Galactica, it is completely worth the investment. It's a fantastic show.
And what I think is really interesting about a lot of this kind of storytelling is now that we have Netflix, Amazon Prime, now we've got the Amazon Fire Stick thingy where you can pretty much get all episodes of everything, that there are these franchises that take a long time to tell a story where you really are connected to the characters, and they explore a lot of issues, often about mental health, sometimes about suicide, about psychology. You get a chance to watch that. I mean, it's a great way. I'm not saying that I spent all day watching Supernatural, painting my nails, and doing social media, but I'm not saying it.
Just as an example, as a random example.
Just as an example. I thought one of the interesting suicides in science fiction that I think is kind of interesting in a Thomas Joyner kind of way, and I'm wondering what you guys think about this, is Leonard Nimoy and this really iconic science fiction episode where the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. You know what I'm talking about? Because Thomas Joyner's been talking about eusocial suicide and eusocial sacrifice, and that most suicides, in fact, are possibly a dysfunction of a natural, evolutionarily understandable urge, and that we might start looking at eusocial self-sacrifice at like as sort of some sort of disease or dysfunctional version of that. And I thought that is super interesting. You may tell it better than me. I've never been known for telling a plot right. I never let that stop me, but I've never been known for it. But basically there's this great moment, and your brother introduced you to all these movies, so there's like the end of one movie and the beginning of the next, where Leonard Nimoy is going to sacrifice his life to save literally like everyone. And of course they resurrect him because Spock. Also,
there wasn't intent. Wait, there wasn't intent.
Yes,
because he knew. So there's a really key, because if it wasn't a suicide, good question, but there wasn't intent because he knew that he was going to live. So
we can debate that. We can debate whether or not he knew he was going to live. So, in the context of the movie and how the movie was being made, Leonard Nimoy wanted a good death scene, and he wanted his character to go out saving the crew. But Paramount, the studio making it, said, we don't know if we want to kill off our favorite hero, so why don't you just like do a little thing there just in case we want to bring Spock back. So there's a moment right before he goes into that dilithium crystal chamber to fix the whole problem, and he sort of mind melds with DeForest Kelly's Dr. Bones and says, remember. And so they didn't know if they're going to bring him back or not, but and they didn't know how, if they were going to do that. But I think he does go in there not knowing if he's going to survive that or not.
So I think
go ahead. But like that's like the moment that Joyner talks about, like that's an understandable thing, and that this may be that a lot of suicides may be a disease process version of something that is an important thing to have inside of us.
Yeah. But I think that one of the words that Ali said that was really powerful to me, though, is that this concept of a good death, right? And I think that
way to go tonight.
I think that's really important because one of the things that Susan Stefan talks about is how people in the right to die movement have gotten away from the word suicide. Right, but it is a suicide. Let's not mince words. This someone is choosing to end their life, but they're doing it surrounded by people with an open conversation, in love and with people being aware. It's not this other thing that we often are talking about with suicide, right? So I think this idea of good death versus the overwhelming majority of suicides, which are not good deaths. There are people that are in tremendous pain and in discomfort, and the people around them aren't even aware of how bad things are. So I think that this is one of the things when we get at suicide, we're really talking about lives worth living. And different, and there's different types of death, right? And I just think that this, and I think the Spock example is something that we would describe as a good death, right?
Yeah, I'm reminded of the line from Battlestar Galactica from Admiral or Commander Adama early on. He says, it's not enough to live. You have to have a reason to survive, or something to that effect, which gets at reasons for living. And adding on to that, some of the research about suicidality and how I describe it to a lot of people I'm working with, which is it given the circumstances in your life, given the things that you're experiencing, it makes sense that suicidal thoughts would have come up in the context of everything that's going on. And let's try to understand them, and let's try to help you to cope with these. I think there's a good subset of people for whom suicide is a way to end suffering for themselves or for other people, which kind of gets at some of the stuff that Spock was probably dealing with there. Some of the natural extension of I'm going to try to help this crew and in exchange for my life and all of that. I never thought about that. That is so cool. That is such a great. I'm going to spend some time thinking about this.
Ali, we have to tell you, we had a guest. It's Dr. Steven Stack, who's watched like 1,300 movies about suicide and like died. He makes his wife watch them with him and code them 30 minutes every night for like a decade, like holidays and everything. I've met her. She's a saint. But he says that there's a lot of content and narratives, and he hasn't touched as much of the science fiction or the horror genres, like, and I think this is really interesting stuff.
Well, and I just in terms of that, there's a new episode from Black Mirror tying it back all over again. There's an episode. I'm not spoiling. I'm not going to say what. There is a new episode.
We make those sounds a lot.
Of Black Mirror that deals with some of these ideas of choosing to end your life. I won't say more than that, but yeah, I think this is so. One of the things I wanted to talk about here is how suicide and death and end of life and choosing end of life and all of that stuff. These haven't really been aspects of stories that are usually included or addressed, and by including them in pop culture, by bringing them up for discussion, there's so much we can do to break stigma and have family members and have loved ones and have friends talk about this sort of stuff. That's the real potential here. I think that's the real potential for major social change. If we do these stories right, it can open up a dialogue that can change the culture.
Right. I mean, what you're saying is that someone can tell a story and you can identify with the character and think of them at this sort of safe and entertaining distance by someone who's gifted at helping you sort of see the point. in a way where you're just not as defensive as when it is someone sitting next to you that you have a lot more, sort of on the line with seeing things in a certain way.
Yeah.
That is really powerful. And when we're wanting to understand things like suicide better, or we're wanting to understand people with lived experience or people who've survived in a better way, this is not a bad way to start communicating.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in terms of other aspects here of mental health. So we haven't mentioned Star Wars. I also do like Star Wars. Star Trek is better, but I also love Star Wars.
Way to make the week controversial.
I know. I just have to stir things up. One of the things
we
didn't
talk about this in the pre-show, and if this would have come out sooner, we would have had words.
You're not a Star Wars person. Don't even, Bart.
Well, one of the things I love about the original trilogy, and I think we're seeing this now in this new trilogy too, is the story of a person finding meaning and purpose in their life. Star Wars is a bit more of a blend of science fiction and fantasy, and the story of Luke Skywalker when he's sitting there on Tatooine looking at those twin suns setting is, who am I going to become? What is going to give my life purpose and meaning? And that's the whole story of that trilogy. And I think we're going to see that with this new trilogy in Rey. But these stories also can help us to identify. We were talking about this in the beginning, like what's meaningful to us, what's important, where do we want to, how are we going to stick to, adhere, experience, and feel those real values that we have.
This is the last 4 minutes of the show, and this is where we do sort of. I know it just went like that, and you should know that several people are like, we need to do a show like this once a quarter because there's just so much content.
We didn't even talk about Doctor Who.
Oh my God! Jen Battle is the biggest Doctor Who fan, and she is one of the crisis center directors in Houston. And let me tell you, or my son, who is probably watching some bootleg Doctor Who in the back of the house. But we can do it again. He's not going anywhere. You can also follow him on Twitter. You can follow his YouTube channel. You can read his blog. He's made content. It's for you. So this is where we do sort of final thoughts. Bart, Andrews, final thoughts for the evening.
I'm going to give final thought to Dr. Nathan Demers. Am I saying his last name right? Demers?
Yes, I think it's closer. But Nathan.
Anyway, but Nathan points out that beyond making stories about suicide prevention, which we've been talking about, we need to connect people to them and to help, right? And I think that's one of the things that your blogs do really, really well, Ali, is that not only do you talk about the topic, but you connect it to help. But I think there's a bigger message in Nathan's tweet that this is something we need to be really intentional about. And when people are talking about suicide and people are telling stories about suicide, that we should be building in some messages of hope or some ways for people to reach out and get help, that we should connect some of these dots, which I think is a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tony Wood, I promise you. Oh, I've got a lag.
You do have a lag. You got a nasty lag.
There we go. I've got it out, I think. Tony Wood, you want to ring in with final thoughts?
If only we could do this once a month. There's a lot of material here. I mean,
I can't keep up with the thread.
Have a lot of freedom that the traditional literature folks don't really have. So they've explored so many areas of psychology and of human interaction and human experience that really we haven't always been very comfortable with culturally. But we can do it if it's aliens, it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Ali,
so
go
we got
ahead.
A lot of stuff here. So this is a great show. So thank you for coming. It was wonderful.
Oh, thanks.
Go ahead and share your final thoughts with us.
I think final thoughts. Science fiction is all. Someone asked me to define science fiction a little while back, and I said it's there's stories about what might be possible, and as we evolve, as our society changes, science fiction will continue to evolve and change. And that's cool. And I was going to tie that into mental health somehow, which is, oh, this is how I was going to tie that. You know, the things that give us reasons for living and the things that give us reasons for dying, and how we interact and how we experience these things has completely changed. And social media is an example of that. And I think tying it all back to the beginning too, part of the reason why this election has been so stressful for everyone is how it's been experienced in social media and Facebook and Twitter and all of that. So I think science fiction will always give us great ways to understand and experience this stuff. And if we in the mental health community can use these stories and tap into them to better connect people who love these stories with the work we do and the resources, then we have the potential to do so much more good than we are right now.
I never give a final thought after Dr. Mattu is my final thought. This is, you know, I usually have something to say. I don't think I do this week. Which is in 4 years. I can't believe it. You've been with us, hashtag SPSM. Please do follow Dr. Mattu on Twitter. Please do go see the Psych Show on YouTube. It's really cute. You'll enjoy it. It will be fun. And it's really cool. Like, if you geek out over psychology, mental health, if you geek out over science fiction, and a lot of us do, it's really just a great channel for you. Go ahead and tell us the name of the blog again. It's the brain one.
Brain Knows Better. So it's a line from Death Cab for a Cutie. My when I see you, I really see you upside down, but my brain knows better. It picks you up and turns you around. That's where I got it from. So brainknowsbetter.com.
We're gonna have to do like a music episode that's not Spotify, Bart. I know that got Bart's attention. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be talking more about the election on the 4th of December. Just one more quick note. Next week is the Sunday before Thanksgiving. People are traveling. People are getting ready for the holidays. People are wrapping it up. Historically, that has not been the week that everybody wants to be super professionally attentive. But it is a week when everyone wants to be social. So we will be having open mic night that night. And if you have been around, some of the SPSMers have downloaded Evil Apples. If you want to open mic and play Evil Apples next Sunday, 9 p.m., do be there on the 27th after you've had your turkey for the Americans. After you've had your turkey, we're going to be having an ethicist on. It's going to be more interesting than ethics has any right to be. And you're going to find out why our guest was targeted by Mike Huckabee and Fox News for his ethics articles, which is pretty interesting. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great week. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.